Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. And Abe, I don't know if you can see it through the camera lens, but brother, I got goosebumps. You know why? Because college football is back. We are recording this on Thursday night, which means we got college football action. Colorado is taking on North Dakota State, and we have a jam-packed schedule here on Thursday. And it just gets even better because on Saturday, the great football gods have blessed us with an unbelievable slate of games. We have several ranked versus ranked matchups. We have matchups on Saturday. We have matchups on Sunday. And we got matchups on Monday. It is just a jam-packed schedule. And Abe, do you know what that means? We got a jam-packed show. College Football Overtime Week 1 preview. It's finally here. No more pontificating. No more speculating. No more practice reports. We're doing game previews, and we're very excited. Thank you so much for joining us. If it is your first time, thank you. If it is your second time, why aren't you subscribed yet? Make sure you drop a like, drop a subscription. If you are watching this on Twitter, if you're watching this on YouTube, doesn't matter where you're doing it, go find us. Give us a follow at GChapATL, at Abe Gordon on social media, and then go like the video because that's how we pay the bills, and we really appreciate all of you. And that's how we keep all this content free. So really, really a lot of fun. We got a lot to get into here, but before we do that, got to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, we're doing good. I think we've been pretty spot on so far. I think we all had some concerns about Florida State, and we talked about that in our last episode. But safe to say I'll probably get a couple wrong today. I think that's okay. I'll get a couple wrong throughout the season. That ain't going to drive me away from the sport we love. So let's get after it.
Hey, we reserve the right to change our opinion when presented with more information. And we're never wrong. We just didn't have a complete picture. That's really the important thing here. But, Abe, we're going to start right here in the beautiful city of Atlanta because the University of Georgia and the Clemson Tigers are playing in a ranked matchup. Top 15 teams. Number 14, Clemson. It says at number 1, Georgia. It's at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And look, if you didn't need any more juice to get you excited about this one, how about this? You only have 3 coaches that are active in college football after the retirement of Nick Saban who have a national championship, and 2 of the 3 are playing in this game. The other one's Mac Brown. We don't have to worry about Mac Brown at North Carolina right now, at least for the purposes of this podcast. And it's a 13.5-point spread. Feels pretty large when you just only look at the talent composite. If you put any weight into that, 24/7 Sports comes out with that every single year. And this is the number 2 roster versus the number 5 roster. So, Abe, I'm going to ask you, why do you think this is so big?
Well, I think you've got one quarterback that's listed among the Heisman favorites, that's listed as a likely top 5 pick. Of course, we're talking about Carson Beck. And you've got one quarterback where you start to question if he can get the job done in the Clemson offense. I think you've got one coach that has clearly identified himself as the successor to Nick Saban as the guy in college football. That, of course, being Georgia's Kirby Smart. And you've got another in Dabo Swinney that's got the resume of a guy that should be in that discussion, but has refused to adjust with the times of college football. Is this the year where it finally, and it's caught up with him before, but I mean dramatically catches up to him to the point where it now is viewed as a trend, to the point where it is viewed as, I don't know if this guy will ever bring the program back to where it was for that stretch. And it was a longer stretch than people want to realize. It was Deshaun Watson. It was Trevor Lawrence. But even before that, I mean, it goes back to guys like Taj Boyd. I mean, it was a very long stretch of very high-level competitiveness. And to me, there's a lot of questions because, look, you tell me Georgia's number 1. You tell me they've got the Heisman quarterback. You tell me they've got one of the best offenses, one of the best defenses. Until I see it, though, there's always going to be that idea. They lost a lot of guys. I mean, they did. And now they've lost a lot of guys before. And Alabama, through their dynasty, lost a lot of guys. And Ohio State and Michigan, through these past years, have lost a lot of guys. And, we get that. And replacing those guys has seemed regular, Garrett. But I don't want to just assume it's a given. And so I do want to see certain aspects of this Georgia team. We're probably going to be without Trevor Etienne. I don't know if you're hearing differently, but it feels like everyone that I've talked to is leaning towards he's not going to play in this game. I think that's a bigger hit for the Georgia offense than a lot of people want to admit. And the question of no Lad McConkey, no Brock Bowers, who is stepping up? You can rattle off the names of their receivers. We know who they are, right? It's not like an unnamed God is going to come down and get it done. We know who these players are, but it's still a matter of seeing them turn into those alphas. And so for that perspective, I want to see that from the Georgia offense. I have much fewer questions about the Georgia defense, Garrett. I really do. I just think they're locked and loaded. Maybe you want to ask for a little bit more domination up front if you had to be specific, right? I think the linebackers and the secondary is one of, if not the very best in all of college football. And then the question rolls over to Clemson, right? For me, this has got to be another team that is led by the defense, and the defense was not an elite unit last year. I think they were very good, but they were not an elite unit. And so I'm waiting to see if they find a way to slow down Georgia. And then on offense, the Cade Klubnik questions are going to continue until he answers them. And I think there's plenty of questions to be asked this year, Garrett.
Yeah, and I think the number one thing for me, if you're looking at Clemson right now, is there going to be a year two sort of synergy increase, a resurgence, if you will, for Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik? I mean, you talked about Cade Klubnik by himself, but ultimately it's like he didn't really have a lot of talent outside, and I think that was a big deal for this team. They go out and they add two prominent recruits in this last cycle, two guys who are in the top 50 of 24/7 rankings, TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco. I don't know if two freshmen are going to be enough to really make a dent necessarily, but they can do a play or two. They can come in and make a move, you know, and like things happen in a football game. But really, it's the synergy between Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik. That's really what it comes down to for me, because I don't necessarily see Clemson finding a lot of success. And one big theme last year is Clemson, when they were away from home, was not a very good offense. At home, they were great. I mean, like they were 37 points per game. I mean, Cade Klubnik wasn't awesome, but he wasn't bad. When he was on the road, it drops down to 21 points per game. He threw the majority of his interceptions when he was away from home. So not even technically in a true road environment, just not at Death Valley. And I just have tons of questions about what Clemson's going to do. And I'm not trying to sit here and disrespect what Clemson is or what they have done or what Dabo Swinney is or will be, because I think that they're going to be a good football team. They're going to remain a good football team, and they could lose this game by 30 points and still go on and win the ACC. I mean, like we could talk about Florida State in the same vein. But Clemson's replacing 6 defensive backs in their secondary. That'd be hard if you're going up against McNeese State, because you're trying to figure it out. Like what we saw from them last year in that opener against Duke, they got smashed. They got out physicaled in that game. And you're taking your level going from about a 5 in what you saw in Duke to about a 17 in what you're about to see from Georgia. Because you talked about the turnover from year to year with the Georgia program and in Alabama and Ohio State. Those aren't good teams. Those are great programs. And that was the biggest differentiating factor between those programs and great teams. Clemson was a great program. Clemson is not they're turning into great teams, not great program anymore. And I want to see them get back to that level. They're still recruiting at a high level, but they're missing out on that little extra factor. And maybe that's a transfer portal. Maybe it's lack of dynamic quarterback play, because I think a lot has been said about this dynamic, about the transfer portal. I think it all comes down to the quarterback play. Cade Klubnik has to step up. He has to be a beast, because you're not going to go toe-to-toe with Carson Beck and play a lackluster game and hope to win.
Yeah, I will spotlight one guy for Clemson here, Garrett, and that is we've talked about the questions on the outside at receiver. We've talked about the uncertainty behind center there with Cade Klubnik. If Clemson is going to settle in offensively, the senior running back, Phil Maffa, needs to be a big piece of this. And he's one of the returning weapons from last year whose names you might recognize there under Dabo Swinney. And he's got to carry a big load on Saturday if they're going to go up and down the field with Georgia. Now, the other side of this is, like I said, if they can find some sureness in the secondary. I know you said they're replacing a lot. But if they can impact things up front as well, if they can make this a defensive battle, right, you give Clemson a chance. The bigger concern is if Georgia's able to move the ball, if Georgia's able to put points on the scoreboard, it's just so tough to envision a team keeping up with Georgia offensively with the defense they're going to be presented with. I think for Clemson to win this game, it's going to have to be low scoring. It's going to have to be in the low 20s, if not maybe in the high teens. And I just don't know if their defense is quite at that level. But again, I'm also not yet sold on the explosiveness of the Georgia offense. And so I'm waiting to find out both of those things come noon Saturday.
Yeah, and I don't think it's that you're saying that Georgia's not going to be an explosive offense. I don't think that's what you're saying at all. It's just we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen it yet. And I think the edge for them is going to be on the offensive line. But Clemson, the best way they can counter is with that strong defensive line play, a place that they're still a really good football program right there along that front seven. And that's where they're going to have to make their bones. And because if they get into a scoring battle, I think I like your point. If this gets into a who can score more points, Clemson's going to get run off the field. That's just the nature of how this is going to be. It could turn into a situation where Georgia does what they did to Oregon a couple of years ago. I don't think it'll be quite that bad because I think they can match up a little bit better just physically. But if they get into a scoring battle, it's not going to be pretty for Clemson. But this is a game that I see them losing by 10 or by 30. I don't really see them winning this game. I don't see that path forward. But that doesn't mean that Clemson's, again, a bad football team. They're just a team that they're not quite matched up very well with this Georgia team as of right now. But Abe, one thing you're a Florida fan. It's hot down there in Florida. And that's before you get to the matchup that we're going to see down there in Gainesville, because these fan bases are like oil and water. They don't mix very well. And that's not the only thing that's hot. The pressure on these teams is white hot. What's hotter than white hot? I don't even know what that would be, but that's the seats that Mario Cristobal and Billy Napier are sitting on right now, especially Billy Napier. I've heard a lot of commentary about the loser of this game, pressure just ramping up through the roof. I think that's pretty accurate. Billy Napier, I mean, he's got this brutal schedule. The Florida Gators are in just in dire straits when it comes to what they're going to have to face this year. And Miami is about as tough of a test to kick off the season as you could possibly imagine. Not quite as bad as what it is down the stretch, but it's still tough nonetheless. And look, if they're going to want to win this game, they're going to have to hold up on that offensive line. I've got some questions against a really potent Miami pass rush. But if you're going to get back and you find some time in the pocket, Graham Mertz and Eugene Wilson, that's going to make up for a pretty dynamic duo right there. And then on the other side, Cam Ward. I don't know how well or how quickly. I know they're going to be a good offense eventually, but how quickly can they find that rhythm? You're in a road environment. You have new technology with the helmets and everything else that's going to be going on at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium is going to be raucous. It's going to be an insane place to play. But then on top of that, you have an unestablished relationship with your pass catchers. So I have lots of questions in this game, but this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, this one is all about Cam Ward. I'm going to be honest, and I no bones about it. I am a Florida fan. They are not a more talented team than Miami. Miami is absolutely loaded. But the one question, of course, is the one position that matters most. And I have not been shy to say it. I have at no point bought the Cam Ward hype. I did not buy the hype that he was the best quarterback available in the portal. I did not buy the hype that he was going to consider the NFL draft. And I am not sure that I buy the hype that he can bring this Miami team back. And how many times do we have to hear that the U is back? We've heard it already. I just don't know. I think they are absolutely loaded, though, offensively. And it's just going to take that trigger man to get it done. I think Restrepo is possibly set up to have a year similar to what Luther Burden had last year. I think he is just one of the most underrated players in the country. And I think he's incredibly dangerous. And I think some eyes are going to be open nationally to what he can do potentially as early as Saturday afternoon. But it's all about Cam Ward for Miami. I think up and down the roster, they are a better team. You know, both coaches, I think, are going to have to answer their questions as well. Look, I'm going to be honest, as a Florida fan, and we're kind of talking about it with the Falcons facing the Steelers in week 1, right? With Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. The Steelers fans know which is the better play. I'm not saying DJ Lagway is better than Graham Mertz, but I am suggesting that, like Mike Tomlin, there's probably a package for DJ Lagway. And I'm very interested to see how they work him in there. Graham Mertz statistically is incredibly underrated. But at the same time, DJ Lagway is Gatorade Player of the Year, 5-star, #1 recruit, all that stuff. If I'm Billy Napier, I'm not going down, no offense, but I'm not going down swinging on my career with Graham Mertz at quarterback when I've got that guy sitting there. So I'm not saying he's usurping the job here, but I would be shocked if they don't find a couple of roles or packages or moments for him to get in on this one. So very interested to see how Florida plays. The other thing that I'm looking for out of the Gators is that defensive front. It has been a little bit of a letdown in recent years. You got the big transfer in, though, Joey Slackman, which I think can mess a couple things up, and then big Cam Jackson in the center, and then Shamar James, TJ Searcy in the linebacking core. So I do think the front seven of Florida can do some damage. I think they need to make it a game where, again, it all circles back to Cam Ward, right? Like, make it a game where Cam Ward has to beat you. And you know what? If he's good enough to beat you and all that hype was worth it, as a fan, I'll tip my cap, and Miami's going to be big time off and rolling this year. But I've got to make Cam Ward beat me if I'm the Florida defense. And if he can't do that, it's going to be a year-long issue for the Hurricanes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the thing that was missing last year for them. And look, I like Cam Ward. I just don't like him week 1 right now.
Okay.
It's just the situation. I mean, you're on the road. You're playing in a very hostile environment. And look, you don't have rhythm with these guys. He's the kind of guy who he just wants to kind of get out and make plays. And if you're Florida, I think you're set up to really compete in this game. You really are. Florida can absolutely win this game. I have a hard time getting a read on this one because Florida lines up. I think if they come out and play a really physical brand of football, I think they got a good shot. And that means Montreal Johnson getting out and going on the ground. It means the defense, the linebackers coming in and hitting hard. It means coming in and trying to win in the trenches. Then they got a shot. Because then at that point, that's where you need to trust, if you're Miami, Cam Ward to go out, like you said, to go make a play. He's got to come out and put the team on his back. I just think the edge is to Miami. But if this game was played anywhere else, I would say this is a Miami game. But this is in the Swamp. The Swamp is going to be a very tough place to play. And I don't think Cam Ward has ever played in an environment like this. I don't know if Miami in general, many of these players have ever played in an environment quite like this. It's going to be difficult for them. And I'm really interested to see what this is. It's the defense for Florida, the physicality, the running game, and then the home environment. I just want to see what that can do. But we saw last year too with Florida, Billy Napier, and they go on the road and they go play, albeit another very well-coached team. Well, a well-coached team. I don't want to necessarily give Mario Cristobal too much credit here, but he's a good coach, but he's not exactly what they have out there at Utah as far as like a clinical type of team. Florida, speaking of clinic, they lacked a clinical edge in that game last year. They had procedural penalties. They had big-time tackling problems. You can't do that in a game like this, even if you're playing at home. You got to do the little things right because there was a snafu on a field goal that ended up turning into 6 points. And that's the difference in games like this. And if you're playing at home, if you're playing anywhere else, you got to dominate here at home. You have to win at home because you're not going to get the opportunity later on in your schedule.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, one of these teams is going to be 1-0, and one of these teams is going to be 0-1. But this game individually for each program moving forward, the momentum over the course of the season is much more than just one win or one loss. It immediately sets the winner up to potentially go off and running into whatever season they can have. And I know Florida, obviously, with the back end of their schedule, you can only go off and run so far before you run into some real issues. That's its own story. But the same thing goes. Like for Miami, this would really set them off to announce themselves, especially with Florida State's issues, right, against Georgia Tech, especially with the possibility, as we just discussed, probably likelihood that Clemson gets beat by Georgia. A win against Florida on the road is going to put you in a discussion for, can we win the ACC? Obviously a loss, and there's a lot more questions both for this team this year, but also for the head coach. And it's certainly even a win here for Florida isn't going to keep those discussions from Billy Napier, because you know of how many losses are unfortunately going to be coming on that schedule. But a win here still does at least put you into some positive momentum, and maybe set you up. Again, you're not going to shock the world and get to the college football playoffs if you're Florida. At least even I realistically don't think that. But can you do enough to save this man's job and take advantage of an incredible recruiting class over this year and next year? Because if not, you're kind of restarting the whole thing. So this game is a lot more than just a season opener. It's a tone setter for both programs.
Yeah, and if you're the Miami Hurricanes, you don't leave the state of Florida until October 5th. You only leave the state of Florida twice until November the 9th when they come here to Atlanta. You have an opportunity to really make an impact here early in the early goings of your schedule. And I'm just very interested, because you cannot drop games like this. If you want to be a big-time competitor, which is what Mario Cristobal was brought to Miami to do, you have to go and win games like this. But speaking of winning big games, one person who was fired last year because he didn't win those big games, in fact, he dropped a few too many games, Jimbo Fisher. And he's no longer the head coach of the Texas A&M Aggies. Instead, now Mike Elko makes the trip over back to where he was defensive coordinator, and now he's taking over as the head coach. And I think the narrative around Texas A&M has been very interesting, Abe. And it's because we've had several podcasts, and we're victim of it as well. And the more I was doing research for this specific game, the more I kind of realized that we were perpetrators of this same narrative. Texas A&M is not rebuilding right now. Let make no bones about it. They are one of the most talented teams in the country, but they've been one of the most talented teams in the country for a few years now. We're going to find out this year if Jimbo Fisher was effectively the problem in College Station, because Mike Elko's there. You get new leadership. You have a new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. Everything is a little bit different, but a couple of those pieces are still pretty much the same. You still have tons of talent, lots of 5 stars on that defense, especially. We'll see if Mike Elko is really going to be the biggest thing, because you're going to start the season off with a top 10 opponent, Notre Dame. But I think you have a number 7 team in America, but I don't know. I still feel like this game has an edge for Texas A&M. What do you think?
I think a lot of people want to give Texas A&M an edge, and I'll be quite honest, I'm not one of them. I know they are at home. I just don't see this program being there right now, and I am very open to being wrong on this, by the way. Texas A&M, to me, is one of the really, really big mystery teams, and what I mean by that is I would not be surprised if you told me that they end the season ranked 7th in the country, where Notre Dame is ranked now, and are in the college football playoffs, and people are scared to play them. And I wouldn't be surprised if you told me that instead of being ranked 7th, they got 7 wins and 5 losses, and are in the rebuilding mode that you speak of. It is so the range of possibilities for me this year for A&M are so all over the place, and it goes into a couple of things, right? Like, all right, so they got the recruiting classes, right? Is it a situation where the recruiting classes were not properly ranked? And look, there's no surprise. Certain coaches, certain schools, when they get a recruit, that recruit all of a sudden's a 4-star as opposed to a 3-star, or all of a sudden's a 5. I mean, look, I'm not telling any industry secrets. That's how it goes sometimes. Look and see when Ohio State and Georgia offer a guy, how quickly that guy suddenly is a 5-star. I mean, that's just how it goes. Were the recruiting rankings wrong? Was it a situation where Jimbo was so bad at getting the best out of his highly ranked recruits, and he didn't develop, and he didn't coach, and he didn't this or that? I mean, there's so much to figure out about Texas A&M that it's really difficult to lock in on this one. And so because of that, I'm going to focus on Notre Dame. And there's a couple things that interest me when it comes to Notre Dame. Notre Dame's defense, I think, is the story here because we're all going to focus on Riley Leonard, right? And we're all going to talk about the transfer quarterback out of the ACC who, if he hadn't rolled his ankle last year, who knows how Duke would have been throughout that season. I know he's the story, but I think there are some guys in that secondary for Notre Dame that are going to shut opponents down. And we've seen in years past when Notre Dame's good, it's because the defense is a nightmare. I don't know how they are up front. We're going to find out going against the Texas A&M offensive line and running backs and all that stuff. But I know that their secondary can lock it up. And so if they can hold strong in the run defense, this Notre Dame team is going to be led defensively, which I also think leads perfectly into the type of quarterback that Riley Leonard is, the type of offense that he can lead, where you don't need him necessarily to score 35, 40, but if in a competitive game, that's a dude that we've seen last year, Garrett, can make plays, extend drives, find ways to win. And so I'm really interested in Notre Dame because if their front seven is as good as their secondary is, you talk about, we've seen that Clemson defense carry them when the offense has failed in years past. I think that could be what we're looking at with Notre Dame, except the potential of the offense not necessarily letting them down. And so I'm very interested in this one. Again, Texas A&M, Garrett, they really might be my biggest mystery team in terms of like how good they could be versus how bad they can be. I'm not sure I am more uncertain on anyone. So I do like Notre Dame to go in and win this one. I think it's a big statement for them, especially with this 12-team playoff, right, with the specific rules that Notre Dame has to abide by and where they have to finish and all that stuff, and they can't be a top four seed. I think this is somewhat a statement game for them. I think they approach it as such. I don't think it's a massive game for Marcus Freeman, who still has a ton of questions about, his validity as Notre Dame head coach. But I just don't know. I really don't know what we get out of Texas A&M, and that's why it is such an interesting week one game, is because I could see Notre Dame walk in there and handle business. I could see Notre Dame get absolutely stomped by a Texas A&M team that is massively underrated at number 20 and could take Florida State's place as number 10 as soon as Tuesday's AP poll. And so it is such a tough read with the Aggies.
I think this is honestly, this is a fascinating matchup. I love it. And I mean, can Riley Leonard come in and be Superman? Do you trust him to come in and be Superman? He was at Duke, and he was especially early before he got banged up. And I'm less bullish on Notre Dame than you are. I really like Notre Dame, and one of the big factors of what Notre Dame was last year specifically was physical. They were very physical. Audric Estime at running back, the offensive line was real tough, but a lot of those guys are gone. Audric Estime is in the NFL. He's playing for the Denver Broncos. You have several new starters on that offensive line. I just have a hard time believing that they're going to find success against this Texas A&M front seven. And that is what the difference in this game is going to be for me. That's what I think. That's what I see. And then on offense, it's Connor Wegman. Can he make an impact? He showed flashes last year. The former 5-star player, another one of those guys, 4 or 5-star player, really highly rated player. But who's he going to be throwing the ball to? Evan Stewart's gone. You're still returning a good bit of your production, but your number one killer is gone. He's up at Oregon. I think the rushing attack should be okay, but I don't necessarily see it finding a ton of success. Maybe just staying ahead of the chains. That's something that they'll have to do in this one. But Abe, this is going to be a low-scoring game. I think the over-under is set somewhere in the mid-40s. That's, in my opinion, pretty accurate. This is going to be kind of like that 20-17 kind of game where there's going to be this one big play that's going to come in and someone's going to slip a tackle, or maybe someone's going to throw a pick, or something's going to happen. And then on top of that, I think Kyle Field is going to be a big difference in this one. It's one of the toughest places to play. You got 100,000 plus screaming Aggies. And the OC matchup is also one that I'm fascinated by. You have a new head coach, of course, but Mike Denbrock, one of the least heralded offensive coordinator moves from last year. He coached Jaden Daniels last year at LSU. He's the OC up there at Notre Dame, and now he's got another really talented quarterback. Maybe not quite Jaden Daniels level talent, but Riley Leonard's still pretty damn good. Colin Klein is on the opposite side. He comes down from Kansas State, and I really like Colin Klein lined up with Mike Elko on the defensive side. So, look, this is a fascinating game. Two teams who I think have been criminally underrated. Well, one team that's been criminally underrated, and one team, Notre Dame, that's been not talked about quite enough. And I know that's weird to say, talking about Notre Dame, a team that is either universally loved or despised whenever you bring them up. But Marcus Freeman, I think, needs this game because you need to step the tempo early in this season if you're Notre Dame, because you look down this schedule and, I mean, it's gone are the days where Notre Dame just sort of lines up against a cream puff schedule and then just sort of sticks their chest out. But they still don't really get tested until the middle of October. I mean, if you include Georgia Tech into that level, at which after last week, maybe you can. But then their November schedule, you get into Florida State, you get USC. It's not exactly what it was last year, where they're taking Ohio State, and then they got Duke, and which Duke was really good at the time that they played. And it's not quite as sexy of a schedule as it was in the last couple of years. So you need games like this. You have to go out and put out at least a good performance, because you don't have the benefit of the doubt of having a conference schedule to back you up. You're not going to get into that top 4. You're not going to go be a conference champion. So you have to look impressive throughout the course of the season. And this is your first real big opportunity.
I think we talked about Georgia, Clemson, even to an extent, Florida, Miami. I'd be surprised at certain outcomes in those. I would not be surprised by pretty much anything you laid at my feet in this one. Of all the week 1 games, it is the worst read that I have because there's, and to me, so many of the questions are just about, as I mentioned, just how good Texas A&M will or won't be. If it's good A&M, I don't know if Notre Dame can run with them. I really don't. But if it's bad A&M, I do think Notre Dame can. And I just don't have an answer. I don't even have a lean as to if I think they're good or bad A&M. And so this is the one that I probably I wouldn't say most interested in, just because I'm interested in all of them. I think we both are. But maybe most intrigued by, only because I don't have a feel for it. And at the end of the day, you could tell me any team wins by a lot or a little. I don't think I would sit here and say, I can't believe it happened that way. I have no idea, which is kind of what makes it so exciting in the first place.
Yeah. And you know what the coolest part about this whole discussion is? We've discussed 3 games. It's the 12 o'clock game, it's the 3:30 game, and it's the 7:30 game on ABC. How awesome is that? College football is right back into the thick of things. We are very excited. So if you are just now joining us on one of the streams, or maybe you're on YouTube or something else, what are you doing? Drop a like. Make sure to go and subscribe. At GChapATL on Twitter, at Abe Gordon, at College Football Overtime. That is the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. It's going to be a lot of fun this year. We're going to be keeping you company every Sunday, every Thursday, talking lots of college football right here on the College Football Overtime podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. But let's move into another game. This one not on ABC, unlike the other ones, but this one is really fascinating. And it's going to be right at the same time as a game that we have already discussed. It's the backyard brawl. It's Penn State and it's West Virginia. Do not undersell how jacked up Morgantown is about to be. They've already canceled classes on Friday. No, not just West Virginia. I mean, all the local high schools, everybody who's in the area, Pat McAfee and company, they're all coming. It's going to be just incredible. I am so very excited for this one. New offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator for Penn State. This is a program that's kind of undersold. Like, you know, they've oversold and underdelivered. Let's put it that way. James Franklin, I don't know if he's under any pressure necessarily or heat. I don't know if he's on a hot seat at all, but look, you come out and start the season off with a loss. Not a very pretty outcome over there in Penn State. But look, I think Penn State has a pretty large edge, but West Virginia, they can do a couple things pretty well. They had a really resurgent season last year. We saw them take a gigantic step forward. And if they're going to win, it's by getting Penn State into third and long situations. That's really what it's going to come down to, because what we saw from them last year, Penn State, is a willingness to run the ball, but a stubbornness about running the ball. They couldn't do a whole lot else. Drew Aller was underwhelming. The explosiveness of this offense was underwhelming. That's why you have a new offensive coordinator in tow. Is Nick Singleton, is Katrin Allen, are those two going to be enough? I think that's really the biggest question, because if they can stay ahead of the chains, I don't see how West Virginia slows them down.
Yeah, you mentioned the running back duo, and I think they need to be mentioned one more time. Nick Singleton, Katrin Allen, close to, not quite, in my opinion, where Ohio State's duo is, but they're probably not far off. They are probably right in line with the second or third best running back room in the Big Ten. The thing for me is, and by the way, speaking of Ohio State, don't forget the transfer into Penn State on the outside, Julian Fleming, who's going to be one of the top targets 100%. As well. I don't know how to get last year out of my head, Garrett. And what I mean by that is we were told that Drew Allen was going to come in there and light things up. And that is very far from what he did in big games. And he was a problem. He was young. It's understandable, but that's what we were told he was going to do, and it didn't happen. And so now when I'm told I'm high on this Penn State team, I think their offense can be this. I think they're explosive like that. All I've got to say is the same question we had about Drew Aller last year. I'm being told to re-up it again this year. I have got to have my caution hat on when it comes to building electricity for the passing offense there. We mentioned Singleton and Aller. Excuse me, not Aller. We mentioned Singleton and Allen. I do think they're going to be able to run the ball. But when they face a front that's able to limit them, and I did not necessarily going to be in this game, although, as you mentioned, when Morgantown gets ramped up, they can be a real problem. Yeah. Aller's going to have to deliver, man. And like, he's going to have to deliver in big games in ways he didn't last year. And so very interested to see from that perspective. I think starting out the season ranked 8th is probably a pretty good measure for Penn State. I don't really think you could place them much higher until you see Aller become a star. And, I think they're better than the teams that are ranked 10, 12, 13. I think it's a pretty accurate spot for them. I don't know how much higher they can get than 8, but it certainly will go lower if you lose, and that's always going to be on the table. But quite frankly, they are the better team. Like, of all the matchups that we've talked about today, with respect to, I guess maybe Clemson and Georgia, this is probably the biggest disparity in terms of the pure talent on the team. But as you mentioned, environment matters, and West Virginia, when they want to be, can be an insane place to play. And so, look, it's a 4-screen Saturday, and that's because Georgia and Clemson and Penn State, West Virginia are kicking off at the same time. So you're going to have to be locked into both. I'm really interested in Penn State because everyone wants to just thrust Ohio State in there and I guess throw Oregon right behind them. And Penn State, if they can show me something here this week, maybe you'll have their say as well.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is a Penn State team that did a really good job against the not quite so good opponents on their schedule last year, and then struggled mightily against the good ones, mainly the two that they played, Penn State Ohio State and Michigan. And you mentioned it with Drew Aller, and I'm not going to go back through everything that you said, but it's like Drew Aller's got to be better. And I don't know if this is the game necessarily where he's going to be put into that position, but we'll see. Drew Aller did really well in this game last year. I think he threw over almost 300 yards or maybe more than that. I mean, he lit up the scoreboard in this game last year, but West Virginia found their footing later on in the season. And this is the team that can bow its ears back and get after the quarterback. It led the Big 12 in sacks last year. And I said it when I opened it. You got to stop the run. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that. But when they're on offense, Garrett Green, I mean, he's a good quarterback. He can run the ball effectively. He had 13 rushing touchdowns last year. They can run the ball well. And I just don't think that that's necessarily going to be their key to success. If they can run the ball, then I give them a good chance of pulling this upset. I just don't think that that's going to be happening necessarily. Penn State, for all of their shortcomings on offense, that defense is something fierce. The defense is very good. And when it wasn't playing Michigan and when Michigan ran the ball, 30 times in a row on them, this is a team that kind of stuck up for itself and did really well, specifically on that defensive side. So Garrett Green's going to have to throw the ball, and he's going to have to throw the ball really well. And West Virginia is not going to be able to make any mistakes because the way that this game sort of feels, and I'll let you jump in here on this one in a second, is just Penn State sucking the life out of the Mountaineers. And that's really the recipe for success for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, Penn State would love this to be, for lack of a better term, a boring game. A game where they score on their first 3 drives, they're up 21-0, and then it's like a dribble out the clock mentality, and maybe they get to 30 to 3 or 30 to 7, but with something where there's an immediate rush, and then the game kind of settles into a state of neither team needs to, put too much energy into it. And so I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying that's what I think Penn State. I mean, again, that's probably what a lot of teams would like to do in their opener. So,
sure,
like, who we could like, I'm sure Miami would
love
a
lot of teams that would like to go up 21.
Yeah, the first 3 drives and play it out from there. So,
it's a good recipe for success.
Dumb for me to say that, but I do think we've also just, and I only say that about Penn State because I do think I've seen them get leads and settle into games as opposed to really. Georgia will step on your neck, right? They get you up, they get up 21-0, and then they'll go for 35-0. You know what I mean? I don't know if this Penn State team really has that in them yet, but I'm interested because Penn State is one of the very few teams that I think can throw a wrench into the plans of what we believe or deem to be conference favorites. And not an individual favorite. I think when you look at this, you talk about both Oregon and Ohio State. When you look at the SEC, you talk about Georgia, Alabama, and Texas, right?
And Missouri and Ole Miss.
Well, but I think they're kind of the wrench in the because sure. And then I don't even want to get into the favorites in the Big 12. It's a disaster. We've talked about that before a couple weeks ago. So
makes for a lot of fun conversation.
Yeah. But yeah, this is one of the teams I really want to see step up and impress on Saturday and kind of just serve notice, right? Like kind of serve notice. The concern is we've done this before, Garrett, haven't we?
Yeah.
This is the year that Penn State's ready to deal with Michigan and Ohio State. Guess what? No, it wasn't, man. Like whatever year you told me that, last year, year before that, no, it wasn't, man. Like it just wasn't. So maybe this is the year. I don't know, but we're definitely going to be fed that narrative if they impress on Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we go through the list of teams that need to impress the most, you could make an argument that Penn State is probably that team. That or maybe Miami or Florida, one of those two. Notre Dame's in that kind of category as well. So I might open the floor for you later in the show just to kind of discuss that topic. But look, there are a lot of teams that play a lot of games that are very important. And these are all the games on Saturday that are going to be super big. I mean, these are 2 prominent programs playing each other. And West Virginia playing for pride. This is a fantastic rivalry game, the backyard brawl. Another one of those games that kind of went by the wayside with all of the conference realignment that went on. And I mean, this is one of those rivalries that I really love. And I'm very excited to watch this game right there alongside of Clemson and Georgia in that noon slot. So make sure you're watching that one. But one thing that's going to be kind of on its own is a game that's no less interesting than all of these other matchups. It's one that's played way out west. And maybe some people have some dollar bills on it. Just hopefully none of the players because they'll be out there in Las Vegas, Nevada. Very interesting game. And it's because these 2 teams are a lot more similar than maybe the brands might lead you to believe. But we got 2 great offenses. Or last year, at least, these are 2 offenses that were good enough to win national championships. I'm not afraid to say that. The offenses were good enough to win national championships last year. The defenses were abysmal, to say the very least. And these are two teams, two head coaches that are hoping, no, praying that their defenses have caught up to something that they saw from those offenses, because both teams lost Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks. Both of those guys were top 10 picks, top 3 picks, and they're off in the NFL. Blake Baker was brought in to LSU. Can he unlock Harold Perkins? Doesn't seem like it's that hard of a thing to do, but for whatever reason, Harold Perkins was a non-factor last year. Harold Perkins might have been the best defensive player in college football last year that nobody talked about because he was on this dreadful LSU defense. Well, now he's going to get shot, and he's going to be playing his way into potentially the top 5 of the NFL draft next year. And then Dayton Lynn, he was brought in to just come across town, go coach the defense at USC. These are 2 really strong hires, but they're 2 hires that are going to be expected to come in and have the lion's share of responsibility for the success, the eventual success or lack thereof of either of these programs this season. It's all going to happen over there in Las Vegas. Beautiful. I think it's Allegiant Stadium. Is that what it is? That's right.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's so difficult because LSU had no business being a top 20 team last year, no business being a top 15 team last year, no business being a top 10 team last year, except for, Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas. None of those guys are here. And so how you're placing LSU 13th preseason is beyond me. One of these teams is massively overrated. I don't know which one. Look, you could talk about Garrett Nussmeier all you want. I've seen him here and there. I think he's okay. I don't know if he's the next coming of Peyton Manning, though. And so I'm going to slow my horses on him.
Right.
Yeah. And then for USC, they're a mess all over the place. They weren't very good defensively. Without Caleb Williams, they were just an average team offense. Now, they had Caleb Williams, but without him, they were just an average team offensively. And so it's going to be very interesting to see in this one. But for me, the defense for LSU can't possibly be as bad as it was a year ago. I mean, it can't. And so I look at this and I expect them to try and use this as a game where they can serve notice that we're going to be able to win this game both ways, that we're not going to be playing every game in the 40s and 50s this year. And so we'll see if that's the case. We'll see if that's how it plays itself out. But this is another one where it seems like one of these teams does not deserve to have a number next to their name. I just don't know which one it is yet.
I think it's a very compelling game. I think it's something that I really want to see both offenses, just because I'm interested to see what they are in the wake of departures, specifically under center. I'm fascinated to see what the defenses look like. You have a brand new defensive staff on either one of these teams. And the other big question, I'm a bigger believer, I think, than Garrett Nussmeier, than a lot of people are. Maybe Chipper is as well. I'm not sure. She's singing, so I'm assuming that she's a big fan of offense, so she's going to be a big fan of this game. But Garrett Nussmeier, I mean, the biggest question there is offensive line is going to be strong, but I don't know who's going to be catching the ball for them. It hasn't really been a consistent issue for LSU in the last 15 years, replacing dynamic pass catchers. Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors off to the NFL. Sure, they had Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. at one point, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. I mean, they turn wide receivers over in that program. It's unbelievable. It's incredible. It's like a bag of chips. Whenever you have one, you got to have another, right? No one's ever had just one Frito-Lay, like one Lay's potato chip. Mason Taylor is a big tight end. He's going to be a big target for them this year. I'm just interested to see what that offense looks like. But Garrett Nussmeier is going to be a lot of fun to watch. He's going to be a different type of coffee. Some people like iced coffee. Some people like hot coffee. Some people like lattes. Garrett Nussmeier is a latte. And Jaden Daniels was kind of like one of those espresso type, the cream foam ones that you get, like the nitro cold brews that you can find at Starbucks. It's going to hype you up with caffeine. It's going to be really exciting. But Garrett Nussmeier, it's going to be a different breed. So I'm interested to see what that looks like. But on the other side, how much heat is Lincoln Riley feeling right now? Is he feeling heat? Is he on a hot seat? Because he's certainly underdelivered. He's had Heisman Trophy winners, but hasn't had any success in the 12 the 4-team playoff, much less the 12, which we'll see if he ends up having any success there. Now he's moving into the Big Ten. Games like this for Lincoln Riley are going to be extremely important because, generally speaking, when you're a very physical team and you play a Lincoln Riley coach team, you run over them. They struggle whenever a team matches what they do with physicality. And it's not just because they play in the Sunshine State, or not the Sunshine State, but they play in the sunny Southern California. They're not soft, but when they get hit with a physical team, that's when they really, really seem to struggle. And I mean, Miller Moss was the backup quarterback, 3 years as a backup, had 6 touchdowns in the Holiday Bowl, got fans pretty excited about the future behind Caleb Williams now that in the wake of the number 1 overall pick. But Lincoln Riley has to start feeling some pressure at some point.
I think this is a big pressure game for them, for Lincoln Riley specifically. I totally agree with you. You're talking about heading into a now Big Ten schedule, which you're going to face the powers of that conference, and I don't know if you're going to be favored against any of them. It would do you very well. It would serve you very well to get a win over a highly ranked SEC team. And so I agree with you. I think this is a big game for Lincoln Riley. They have got to show that they are better than whatever last season was for them. You're USC, man. Like, I don't care if you're in the Pac-12 or the Big Ten. Like, starting the year out at the 23rd ranked team in the country, being 1 loss away at this point from being unranked, that's unacceptable for that program, man. Like, it really is. And either Lincoln Riley's going to get them back to where they need to be this year, or they might be looking for a new head coach because this is a team that has – look, I know everyone probably feels this about their own program, right? But there are like 7 or 8 teams out of a 12-team playoff that have no business ever missing the playoff, right? Ohio State, Michigan, and USC probably are the 3 teams in that discussion for the Big Ten. Georgia, Alabama, and Texas, just, and I'm not trying to smidge anyone else, probably are those 3 teams, and yet, like, they have no business ever not making it.
Yeah.
And I don't have any trust right now or faith that Lincoln Riley's taking this team to the playoffs. Not saying he won't, but I don't have any faith in it. And so it's going to be a big game to showcase maybe that potential this year.
What's separating USC from being a great team? We know they're a good team, but a great team?
Honestly, every time I look at what makes these teams great, it's the defense, and they have not been anywhere near good enough defensively. You look at Georgia, you look at Texas, you look at Alabama, you look at Ohio State, you look at Michigan. Those are very good defensive teams. Look, offense is going to be there for a lot of different schools, right?
Yeah.
But the defense is what separates you. I stand by that. I'm not saying it's the way to win a title or only way to win a title. But you look at the teams that have won national championships, not saying they've been defensively led. I guarantee you those teams, again, maybe I'm floating myself out there to say something stupid, but like, I feel like the last 5 or 6 teams that have won national championship have all been in the top 20 defensive teams in the country.
Well, it's no, not top 20. I don't think that's correct, but it's teams
you
that
think Michigan
but they
last
play.
year was?
Hold on. Let me make a point. They play
let's go
complementary.
through it real
It's
quick.
complementary defense. That's what it is.
No,
you have LSU from 2019. You have Alabama even in 2020. Those are teams that played complementary defense. They weren't world stoppers. They weren't elite defensive units like what we saw from Michigan last year or Georgia the 2 years before that. Those 3 teams were some badass dudes on defense. That 2020 Alabama team had some dudes, but it wasn't the reason they won a title. I mean, 2019.
I don't think it needs to be the reason, but I think
no, I know you're not saying that either.
Yeah.
But it takes complementary football. Complementary football wins championships, but you also have to be elite. I ask this every year. What are you elite at? I don't have a lot of faith in USC. And what are they elite at? Last year, they were elite at the quarterback position. Is Miller Moss elite? Is Miller Moss right now top 10 in college football? I think by the end of the season, we'll know pretty quickly what he's going to end up being.
Yeah, I mean, for me, maybe it's recency bias, but like Michigan was the #1 ranked defense last year. I'm trying to find what Georgia was in 2022. Georgia
really
was
good.
#2 in 2021. Georgia was number 10 in 2020.
They were really good.
Alabama was 32
in
2020. And then LSU's like the one. Even them, they were 31st in 2019.
What I'm telling you is complimentary football. You play complimentary football, and then you go back to the earlier.
But the point
Alabama
is, but you asked me why they're not where they need to be. There is no complimentary football if your defense isn't ranked top 35. Like that's the point. And they haven't been there in a couple of years, or at least it hasn't felt like they've been there in a couple of years.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like they could do a lot well. They couldn't rush the ball well. The defensive line left a lot to be desired, and I just need to see it from Lincoln Riley. He's been promised as this offensive savant, and it just hasn't been enough. And I'm questioning his future at USC if it doesn't get done. If they go out and they get boat raced in this game, I have some big concerns. Just big concerns. But Abe, we're finishing up here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. If you are just now joining us, well, what are you doing? Where have you been? Rewind, go check out all of our previews. We have 5 fantastic games that we laid out for you. But I just want to give you an opportunity, one quick shout out that you want to give.
Well, it just one of the games that I'm not sure everyone's going to be tuned in for, but I am, is Fresno State, Michigan. I really want to see what's going on there with the Wolverines. Obviously, new coach with Sharon Moore, and I don't know how much faith we have in the quarterback there yet. But like, this is not a complete walkover, and they are still ranked in the top 10. I'm interested to see that on the field. I'd like to see them impress. Not that I'm going to bury them if this is a more competitive game than I think it should be. But like, if they really blow it out the water, I'm going to keep my eyes open on Michigan.
I love that. That's a great poll. And look, we're in Atlanta. I'm going to give you my shout out real quick. And I had this little graphic here. I meant to pop it up. Shout outs. So if you have a shout out, a game that you're really excited to say, to watch here on Saturday, drop it down here in the comments below and let us know why you're so excited to do it. To check it out outside of the fact that it's just your team and it's college football and we love college football. But one thing, we're here in Atlanta, Midtown versus Downtown, Georgia State versus Georgia Tech at Georgia Tech here on the Flats, 8 o'clock on ACC Network. And night games are just fun. They're just fun. They're a lot more fun when you play them with a gorgeous skyline in the background like Georgia Tech does. And this game, of course, it's the kickoff for the Del McGee era for the Panthers. And I want to see what the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets will look like, because I know I cover the team and I go in depth on them. I'm not going to go super in depth here on them right now, but they kicked the ass of the Florida State Seminoles last week. And yes, it was 24-21. Yes, it was a tight game, but they dominated in the trenches. They ran for nearly 200 yards. If they do that again, I think they'll have a pretty good shot of winning this game, but not just that, but going away. But consistency. That was the number one thing that this team lacked last year. Del McGee, he's a great coach. He brought in lots of great coaches onto this coaching staff. Jim Chaney, Scherer, lots of great coaches with NFL experience, big game experience. They're going to have these guys ready to play. I want to see what Brent Key does. What's an encore? Because the season gets started here. They're here in Atlanta. Should be a lot of fun in that one. Just a reminder, just drop your team, drop your game. The one that you're watching, drop it in the comments. Because that's it for us. We've given, I guess, now 7 games that we're really excited to see. 5 games on the national stage. And we're going to be doing this all season long. So make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow along all season long, because we're going to be right back here to talk about how wrong we were, or more likely how right we were, on the College Football Overtime Podcast. We are going to review what was right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. So make sure you follow along. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We will see you right here next week. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Thanks.